recording. All right, well, welcome to Becoming an Independent Respite Provider. My name is Val Madsen, and I'm the Training and Development Specialist at Respite Care Association of Wisconsin. And today we are going to be covering kind of a lot of information. So to get started, I actually, if you wouldn't mind doing this poll, I just want an idea of what we're looking at. So check as many as that apply to you. You know, if you're working for an agency, if you're providing respite, what age group you're providing it for. If you could just let me know so that I have an idea of where I can focus my time on. Okay, perfect. Wonderful. So we are hitting all three age groups. Okay, that's fantastic. All right. That gives me a great idea of where we can go. Fantastic. So if you do have any questions throughout this training, please feel free to put them in the chat box and I'll make sure to read them and address them as we go. And if you have any questions, feel free to unmute and let me know. So today we're going to talk about, we're going to start with some terms and definitions, funding sources, to really figure out how to be an independent provider that provides respite. You really have to look at how the funding system works and how different pay types work as far as whether it makes sense for you to be a respite provider through the system or not. And then we'll also go into some best practices. We do recommend as RCAW that you contact any professionals when determining your business path. We're not an accounting agency, we're not a tax agency, but we'll give you some best practices as we go through, but definitely reach out to professionals in those specialty areas as you build your business. Okay. All right, so we are going to start by talking about funding in Wisconsin. So in Wisconsin, respite can be funded through a variety of different resources. One is through Children's Long-Term Support Waiver, or CLTS, and the Children's Community Option Program, which is CCOP. That's kind of the child side. And then for the adult side, you have Family Care and IRIS. You also have National Family Caregiver Support Program and Wisconsin Alzheimer's Family Caregiver Support Program. That's more your elderly individuals. And then RCAW does provide some funds for respite, and also people can pay out of pocket. So these are all the different ways that people can access funds, but we're just going to focus on kind of the big ones today. So we're going to talk about Family Care and IRIS, Children's Long-Term Support Waiver, and private pay. Those are typically where most of the people fall into as far as providing respite care, and they're also the ones that have more of the regulations. So that is where we're going to focus on. So before we start, we want to go over some terms. Each funding source and each program has their own terms. So making sure that we're all on the same page. So care recipient, consumer, participant, client, member, that's all the person who needs care. So a lot of time in respite, we deal with the caregivers, but any of the family care or IRIS programs really focuses on the client or the member or the participant, whatever terminology they have. And then caregiver, primary caregiver, unpaid caregiver, family, that's the person who's providing the care for the care recipient, consumer, member, participant, etc. I also want to make the distinction between agency employee versus independent provider. So an agency employee is someone who's employed through an agency to provide respite care. The agency itself contracts with the funding source and then matches the provider with the care recipients. Whereas an independent provider does not employ or does not work for an agency. They're either employed directly by the care recipient or they're self-employed and directly contracted with the funding source. So we'll go into those things a little bit more in depth, but that's kind of the two different populations that we're going to be referring to today. So looking at an agency employee, so some benefits is, if you have an agency, The agency takes care of the contracts with the funding source and the billing. Sometimes billing is quite a process. Developing contracts with different counties and rate setting, that can be quite a process. So an agency takes care of that. The agency would take care of connecting you with the care recipients. Agency would be responsible for insurance, workman's comp, liability, kind of all of those things, making sure you're meeting all the requirements that are required for the contracts. They might pay benefits, health plan, paid time off, etc. They might not be flexible with scheduling. So again, if you're working for an agency, they tell you when you have to work and determine the rate you get paid. For some people though, because of the benefits of working for an agency, it might make more sense for you to be employed as an agency employee instead of self-employed. As an independent provider, you get to decide how many clients you have and your availability or number of hours you want to work. Are you going to work 10 or 15 hours each week, or do you want 40 to 45? You get to figure out, oh, I'm going to work with 6 clients, or I'm going to have 15 clients, or I'm going to have 1 client that I see every day. You get to choose that. You choose who you work with, so this is a good fit for me, or this is not a good fit for me. You also choose the rates, though some funding sources do have max limits, so they do limit what your rate could be. But on the other side, you're also responsible for any insurance coverage, so general liability, but also if you're transporting clients, it might be auto insurance, professional insurance, medical insurance, if you need health insurance, any taxes owed. If you are being paid directly, taxes aren't being taken out. So you have to remember to budget that in for, the future so that you're able to cover taxes. And then you also are responsible for securing the contracts. So really making sure that you're meeting all of those processes, which can really be very time consuming and overwhelming sometimes. So that is the two kind of agency versus independent provider. And I always want to start there because some people really like the idea of being an independent provider, but then once they really deep dive into, oh, you're responsible for these things, oh, that might not be a good fit for me. So now looking at independent providers for the rest of this presentation, we're really going to look at them in 2 ways. One is a participant hired worker, and the other is as a self-employed or a sole proprietor. So a participant hired worker is when a client or care recipient uses their self-directed funds to hire the worker. The care recipient is the employer, and they use a fiscal agency to pay the respite provider. So you are not an employer, you are not an employer, you're not self-employed, you are an employee of that care recipient. So that the fiscal agency takes care of the payroll, taxes, workman's comp, all of those things. If you're a sole proprietor or self-employed, you contract directly with that funding source. So typically this would be seen with CLTS or private pay. Participant hired workers you typically see in family care or IRIS. So as a sole proprietor or self-employed, you're required to meet all those contract requirements yourself. So any questions so far? I haven't seen any in the chat, but just kind of very basic. Here's some terms and information for you to consider as you start kind of this process of looking at being an independent provider. So again, feel free to throw questions in the chat. Otherwise, we'll keep moving forward. All right, so we're going to look at IRIS and family care first. So IRIS and family care, again, the care recipients have different options for engaging respite providers. So IRIS and family care serve individuals that are adults and older adults, so with disabilities. So they can purchase agency services, and the agency is an employer. They can recommend a provider to an agency, and the agency is still the employer. So if I am receiving family care funds and I want respite through this agency, I would go to the agency, they would assign me a provider. Or, hey, I'm hooked up with this agency, but I want this person, that person has to become an employee of that agency. Also with IRIS and family care, the care recipient, the client, can manage the provider. Again, the agency still employs the provider, but it can be managed through the care recipient, or the care recipient can act as the employer themselves. So then the care recipient uses a fiscal agent for a payroll, workman's comp, however it is to engage that employee. So again, the care recipient is the employer. IRIS, a little bit more, is self-directed program for, again, older adults or adults and older adults. How that works is a budget is established for the individual based on their goals and needs, and then the care recipient decides how to use those funds within their budget. With IRIS, you would be a participant hired worker. So again, the care recipient is your employer, and then you're paid through a fiscal agent. They would take out taxes. You would not need to be a sole proprietor in this situation because you have an employer through the care recipient. The fiscal agents in Wisconsin, there's 4 of them, and that's something that the care recipients choose. So they would work with one of these fiscal agents in order to employ you as their employee. Family care is also a long-term care program for adults and older adults. And this is a little bit more managed in some cases, though some family care participants can self-direct as well. But they go through managed care organizations. So a managed care organization, or an MCO, is the one that helps determine what services that individual gets. So they work to, the member works together as a team, and they come up with their plan for the year. If the member, so again, the member or the client can hire through an agency, or if they use self-directed services, they could have someone as a participant hired worker. So again, you would be employed through the member or the client. Again, would not have to be a sole proprietor in that situation. There's 5 MCOs in Wisconsin. The care recipients choose based on their county. So depending on what is available in the county is what agency that care recipient is able to go through. That's how that would work. So with the participant hired workers, both IRIS and family care, depending on the MCO or the fiscal agent, there's different paperwork. And the care recipient, the member, is responsible for filling out that paperwork about you. So they submit the paperwork, and then the provider, the respite provider, you become an employee of theirs. In order to find people this way, you have to be connected with a participant. There's not a list in the IRIS or family care system that says, hey, these people are looking for respite providers. There's not a list for you to go on for clients or members to search. One suggestion I would have is get to know your ADRCs in the area if you're interested in working with adults. They have great connections with the participants in their area and might be able to connect you or hook you up. But that would be one way to make connections with different participants. The other thing to think about is MCO or IRIS and family care, they don't just cover respite. That covers all long-term care services. So you might look at what services are provided under those funding sources and be like, oh, I can do respite, but I can also do some of these other things. And so depending on what those other things are, maybe you become a provider or vendor directly through that managed care organization or that fiscal agent. So each managed care organization or fiscal agent has their own page on the website specifically for providers. So it would be something to look at, an opportunity for you to provide more services and not just focus on respite care, but it would be a way to connect directly to the MCO and the fiscal agent. Again, that might make sense for you or it might not. Sometimes the qualifications or the requirements that different MCOs or fiscal agents have will be like minimum insurance coverage, training, education, licensing, things that maybe you don't have or didn't think of. So for example, I'm working on being with a managed care organization as a contractor for a therapy in-home consulting. And even though I wouldn't be transporting clients, they still have a requirement on minimum insurance, auto insurance. And I had to up my liability or my auto insurance to meet those requirements to even be considered as a vendor. So there's, again, different things that you would really have to dig in and look at as you go. So that is Family Care and IRIS. Any questions on the adult side, funding side at all at this point in time? All right, fantastic. So let's hop to the children's long-term care side. So CLTS is the waiver funds for the child program, and it's run through DHS also, and it includes a variety of services. So similar to Family Care IRIS, all these services are covered. Respite is one of those services. The family works with a team to figure out the needs of the child and then figure out what services to meet those needs. And then either an agency or a sole proprietor has to be an approved provider before DHS or CLTS will pay for those services. So as a respite provider, you could be hired through an agency to work with the family, or you would have to be a sole proprietor in this case. So with Family Care and IRIS, you were an employee of the client. CLTS, you are not. The client or the family does not hire you directly through this funding source. So it would be something that you would have to go through the business steps. So for CLTS, the definition of sole proprietor is someone who does not employ anyone else, delivers the services themselves, and bills the third-party administrator, so in this case, WPS directly. So if you are employed by an agency or paid through a fiscal agent, you are not a sole proprietor. If you do the services yourself and you're doing the billing, you are a sole proprietor for CLTS. So that's kind of the distinction there. How CLTS works is this has been a big change for them over the last couple of years, and they've worked really hard to make the system as streamlined as possible. They had to do a big system overhaul in the child side, and now they have a provider registration or a registry that is available for anyone who has CLTS funds to be able to search for approved providers in their county or by service type. So in order to be paid any CLTS funds as either as a sole proprietor or as an individual, you have to be in their system. What's great is they provide fantastic step-by-step directions on how to register as a provider. Again, similar to Family Care and IRIS, you look through the other service descriptions. Maybe there's something else that would be a good partnership with your respite care services. Maybe it is activity of daily living skills support. So look through that list and see if you meet the qualifications or you're interested in any of those service types. And it's something you can add to your profile registry, your registry, CLTS registry profile, that you provide those services as well. The rates for CLTS is determined through CLTS as far as the maximum rate. So they did a very large, again, system overhaul a couple years ago and determined rates for every service they provide. And they often determine two rates. They have the individual rate and they have an agency rate. So you, as a sole proprietor, would fall under the individual rate because you don't have employees, you don't cover workman's comp, you are a sole proprietor, so you're that individual rate. You don't have the overhead that an agency has. Again, that's the max amount that can be paid out. So you have to make sure that whatever you charge, you're able to defend why your services cost that much. Those rates can also vary depending on the level of care that the care recipient needs. And that's not something that you or the care recipient or the family decides. That's something that is done through this, their case manager. The county does that. There's also a separate respite rate if you do group respite. So if you are doing one-on-one respite for a kiddo, you get one rate. But if you have more than one individual there, so maybe you're providing respite for a family that has 2 kids with autism, then it's a group rate. So each child is billed, you can bill each child at the group rate price, not at the individual price, because you are there with more than one child at a time. So that is CLTS. Questions on that? Again, I didn't go into the step-by-step. I'll walk you through their website a little bit in a little bit, and I'll show you where to find those step-by-step directions. They really have done a great job figuring, and communicating how to apply as a provider for CLTS. Any questions on that? All right, fantastic. So then the last thing I'm going to talk about is private pay. Private pay is looking at paying out of pocket. So at any point in time, a caregiver can decide to pay out of pocket for respite services. So this might be more common in your elderly individuals or people who have used up all of their funds and have to pay out of pocket in order to get the care that they need. With paying out of pocket, you really are a sole proprietor, or that's how you would set things up. Even if you're paid cash, it's something that you count as income, something you would have to claim on taxes. So just being aware that you are still running a business, even if someone is paying out of pocket. What's great about someone who pays out of pocket, or if you only have private pay clients, you determine the rate. So you could have a sliding fee based on the care needs of the individual. So you could decide to do that, or you could have a set rate no matter what that individual needs. Typically these people do not find you through an agency, obviously. So you have to figure out how to connect with the individual caregivers that would be interested in doing private pay. So private pay has a lot of flexibility. You don't have to do any direct billing to a third-party agency. You don't have to worry about timesheets per se. I would keep a good record of your hours so that you can defend everything you have in case you were to get audited. But it's something that it has a lot more flexibility, but there's also a lot of liability that falls on you as well. But private pay is a great way. I see this more so for like spouses and their spouses starting to develop some dementia signs, and they just want some companionship care or respite care that way. Come hang out with, my wife for the afternoon so I can go grocery shopping, or so I can go play golf, or whatever it might be. That typically is where we see more private pay, though I've seen some adults and children go a private pay option as well. Sometimes with CLTS, the child doesn't qualify for a lot of hours, but the families still need coverage. And so then they'll have to pay out of pocket. So that is private pay. Did want to mention the RCAW registry. We do have a statewide respite registry that can be searched by anyone. So this might be searched by caregivers that have CLTS funds or have family care IRIS funds and looking for the participant directed workers. Might be someone who's looking for private pay. So we don't classify who it is, that it's only private pay individuals. This could be anyone. So that might be a way for you to connect with clients as well. We are in the process of really updating the registry, adding more individuals to it. And we're really focusing on certain areas of the state as well. And then we're going to do a big push statewide to let caregivers know about it. But if you push it out too early, then if there's no one in their county, they're very unlikely to look at it again in the future. So we want to make sure to get as many providers as possible onto the registry before there's a big push of that information. Okay, so that's the funding sources. Any questions so far on any of that information? All right, fantastic. So now this next section, we're going to talk more about being a sole proprietor. So really looking at best practices when you're developing your business as a sole proprietor. In Wisconsin, you can be a sole proprietor without filling out any form for the state of Wisconsin. Different states have different requirements. This webinar is going to talk about best practices, but there really isn't requirements as far as becoming a sole proprietor. These are things that might not be bad to think about or to look into to run a good quality business. Again, we recommend that you do reach out to anyone, any professionals in the different areas, depending on what information you need. So there's actually quite a few different structures for businesses. We're just going to focus on sole proprietor, which again is you are the only employee. It's you don't have employees, you provide the service yourself. There are other structures, partnerships, LLCs, corporations, nonprofits that are set up in different ways where there's other people involved. Sometimes like you could start an LLC as an individual and there's less liability on your personal finances. But really what we're talking about today is going to focus specifically on being a sole proprietor. With sole proprietors, it's basically linked to your person. So as a sole proprietor, I just fill out an extra tax form at tax time in order to cover my business expenses and income. So it's linked to my personal person. And if there's any liability or anything that happens on the business side, it does fall on me. So any business expenses that I'm not able to pay, it can come out of my personal expenses because it's linked to me. The other structures, there's that you don't have the personal liability that you have as a sole proprietor. Sole proprietors are also the easiest to set up. Again, in Wisconsin, there's not any rules or specific things that you have to do in order to be a sole proprietor. So some of the things, again, these are best practices. So you might not do all of these, but you might do some of these. It really is completely dependent on your business model and what you want to do. I would highly recommend looking at a budget. So before jumping in, you have to really figure out, does this make sense for you? And I'll show you in a little bit a budget worksheet that we have on our website that really digs into, okay, what does it cost to start up a business? But then how much will it cost each month to continue running my business? And how many hours do I have to work each week? If you don't determine your rate, if that's determined by CLTS, then you have to know how many hours. If my expenses are this much and I have to work 60 hours a week in order to meet my expenses, and I'm not making any money, that might not make sense. If my expenses are this much and 20 hours a week meets my expenses and anything additional would be like my income or my paycheck, maybe that makes sense for me. But then is that enough to cover what income I would have in comparison to a regular job? So just some things to think about before you jump in. So the pay rate, again, some might be set by you, Some might be set by DHS or by the funding source. So it's really figuring out what that rate is, or if you're limited to the rates by the funding. One thing to think about is some funding sources only pay monthly. So CLTS is once a month. So you submit your billing at the end of the month, you know, a week or so later, you get one lump sum. So is that something you can do to start off with, you know, or will that take you some time to be able to budget where you only get one lump sum a month? Others might pay bi-weekly, like Family Care and Iris. They're on a regular every other week schedule. Business information. So as a sole proprietor, you can use your own name as a business. You don't have to create a new business name. You can link it to your name. But if you choose to create another business name, make sure you take time to think about it. You know, once you come up with some ideas, do searches, see what comes up or what might be similar to see, I don't want to be really associated with that type of search at all. So make sure it makes sense, and also think ahead. It might make sense now, but does it make sense in the future, depending on how your business grows. You might also want to create a separate email address specifically for business. Do you use your home address as your mailing address or a PO box? Do you have a business phone, or do you just list your personal cell phone? Figuring all of those things out to see what makes sense for you. I know, like Google Voice, I use that for my business phone, and there's no fee. And so that's something, it rings on my regular cell phone, but it's a separate line, and I have a separate phone number, and I can text and phone calls and voicemail through my Google Voice number, and it's completely separate. So there's lots of different programs out there that can allow you to set up at minimal cost some of these other things. You might want to apply for a tax ID number. Again, you don't have to. As a sole proprietor, it can be linked to your Social Security number for taxes. But if you want your own ID number, then you can do that. Again, you won't file separate tax returns. You would just add a Schedule C, put your tax ID number on that schedule, and then claim your income and expenses there. Benefit of a tax ID number is you could open a business bank account specifically for businesses. And it reduces identity theft that way, so it's not linked to your personal Social Security number. But again, just something, a lot of people don't have a separate tax ID number. They just really keep their social as their ID number and are paid that way. Opening a bank account. You can either have separate accounts, so you have your personal and your business, or you just set up a separate personal account that your direct deposit from the billing sources go into the secondary personal account. Whatever it might be. If you set up a business account, there might be higher amounts that need to be kept in the account without being charged a fee. So that would be something to think about, but know that that's a business expense as well. Really kind of figuring out how you're going to track your income. If it's all going into one account and you have expenses and income, making sure you keep really good record of that versus if you have a business account, all expenses and income work from that account, and then you pay yourself, you transfer money from your business to your personal account when it's time to take your income or your pay. Accounting. This is really important. You want to make sure your bookkeeping, that you're tracking everything. If you are billing CLTS, that's done through their system, their WPS system. If you have private pay clients, you have to give them an invoice of some sort. So figuring out how that works, how you're going to set that up, and then also figuring out how are you keeping track of expenses and income? What is a way for you to be able to have all that in one spot so that when it does come to tax time, you're able to provide all that information that you might need and have it in one spot. There's lots of different accounting programs. Something like QuickBooks can be super simple to set up. Typically, there's a cost again. It might be as simple as a spreadsheet in Excel. So use what works for you so that you know that you're keeping track. And again, it's personal. It's whatever works best for you. Okay. Quarterly taxes. So as a sole proprietor, you are paid the lump sum. So when you bill CLTS, when you bill a client, it is for a full amount. There's no taxes taken out of that. So I apologize. So with that, you do have to remember to figure out what your quarterly taxes might be so that you can pay them throughout the year, so that at the end of the year, you are not having to come up with thousands of dollars of taxes, or, you know, whatever that amount looks like. For me, I get my taxes done by a tax company, and they help me figure out, okay, what is my estimate for the income for the next year? Okay, your quarterly taxes would be this. They give me the forms. All I have to do is write a check and mail it in. They give me the envelopes, the forms, who I'm mailing it to, all of those things. So it really is super simple, and make sure that taxes are covered. Insurance, something to think about is insurance. You are personally responsible for everything as a sole proprietor. So you might want to look at a professional liability or general liability, maybe auto insurance if you are transporting clients, things like that. There, one organization that I have found that does specifically have respite workers as liability coverage is HPSO. And I'll put that information out, but Healthcare Providers Service Organization. And they actually list liability for respite care workers as an individual. And it's fairly reasonable, you know, a little over $100 a year. And to have liability coverage, that's a great route to go. But again, something to consider, because you are responsible. So if you don't have that liability coverage, you're still responsible for whatever happens. And then again, reach out to professionals, making sure that you have the appropriate insurance for you, the appropriate taxes, accounting processes. And it might be something you pay for up front. So let's pay for an accountant to set up my books for me, and then I'm set to go. They teach me what I need to know, and I just maybe see them once a year. Or, you know, I work with a tax professional to make sure I file all my taxes correctly. You know, so it could be a larger upfront cost, but will save you time and money in the long run. So just something to consider. And then marketing. So one thing you might want to think about is creating a marketing plan. Do you need a website, or is LinkedIn and Facebook enough? You know, how are you going to gain new clients? What is your plan to let county waiver agencies or ADRCs, Aging and Disability Resource Centers, know that you're available? How do you reach the clients directly? You know, Iris and Family Care, if they're self-directed or they're direct hire, how do they find you? So what is your plan? What is your strategy to get information out there? It might not be a website. You know, there's extra costs. There are very affordable website management systems, but maybe you don't need that. Maybe that's not something that you give to people. Does it make sense to have business cards, or maybe not? Maybe that's an expense that doesn't make a lot of sense, though there are some things you can find that's has pretty good deals or coupons or % off, where business cards aren't too much of an expense. So really just thinking through all the things and figuring out what makes the most sense for you. How are you going to get the word out, and how are you going to move forward? And then go and look at your budget again. So really, now that you've thought about all of these steps, what other costs do you have? Do you need a computer? You know, a decent computer for billing, or a printer to print your invoices? How are you going to take income? Is it direct deposit, but how about your private pay? So are you taking checks? Or are you setting up a different system where they can pay you online? How many hours a month or per week that do you need to work just to cover your monthly business expenses? And also think about the hours that you can't bill for. So me billing for travel, I can't do that. So if I have a client that lives 45 minutes away, that's an hour and a half of travel time I can't bill for. So then is the $12 or $14 an hour that I get for that client plus the hour and a half of travel time, does that actually make sense, or does that not? So really figuring out what makes the most sense for you and all those other costs that is in it. I guess the biggest message here is think through the process before deciding to be an independent sole proprietor instead of being an agency individual. There's lots of benefits, you know, to be a sole proprietor and to be an independent respite provider. But are you able to do it financially? Is that something that will work into your family and into your system? And just really taking the time to plan it out so that you could be successful. All right, so here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me at any time. But before I take any questions, I did want to share a few things with you. So here's the budget worksheet that I was talking about. This is found on our website. And so this is a worksheet that you can use to really look at what are some startup costs. So these are typical costs that it takes to start up your business. If you are providing, so this is also kind of thinking about in-home respite more so than starting your own center. That's a whole different kind of process, but this is a good kind of start. But then looking at what are your ongoing monthly costs? And if your rate is $12 an hour, how many hours do you need to cover so that you're just able to survive? You know, what are your expenses and what profit and how many hours do you need to work per month? So this is a great worksheet that really will walk you through things, and that can be found on our website. So I'm going to hop to our website. If you go in the training courses tab and then scroll down to Kit for Respite Providers, and then down here there's worksheets, and the budget worksheet is here. So that's where you can find that worksheet. I also wanted to show you the Children's Long-Term Support tip sheet. So this is found on their website, and it tells you step one. So this is what you need to become a CLTS provider. You have to fill out this form. Here's the link to this form. This is the information you need. It's a checkbox. You know, here it talks about, you know, your TIN, so your tax identification number, and maybe it's a TIN or maybe it's your social. As a sole proprietor, you can, again, use your social. You know, and then look at the service descriptions, register online. They have, again, the registry there. After you register, they will qualify you, and then the county waiver agency, so your specific county, has to do the next steps. So DHS will do the official, you're approved to be on the CLTS registry, but then the county will have to take it farther. So again, this sheet is a great way to go through all the different steps in order to become a CLTS provider. So that is the information I have. What questions do you have? Okay. Seeing as there isn't, oh, Cynthia, did you have a question?
Yes. What if you want to be, okay, because I am an independent provider, but what if you want to open up a house? What's the process for that?
Yep. Yeah. And that's a kind of a much bigger conversation, depending on ages and licensing and all of those. RCAW does have a course coming up, and I believe you are registered for it, correct? Bringing respite to your community, the 6th course. So we'll be going through all of those steps because that is a much bigger process than a 1-hour webinar.
Oh, I'm straight. I'm good on, I can get it done. But I do have another question. Now, for that training, you said it's gonna be some classes that's in session, in-person sessions?
There's 3 sessions that will be face-to-face, and then 3 that will be online that you can do at your own pace.
Okay, and then will they be? Will they be in Madison or Appleton?
No, it's going to be virtual for this first round. So it will be face-to-face virtual. So it will be like this at a scheduled time. It won't be at a location at this point in time.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good question.
All right, fantastic. Well, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at any time. Otherwise, have a wonderful Friday. It's gorgeous out, so enjoy the rest of your afternoon.